Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
It's not the Twitter it used to be. In fact, it's not Twitter at all anymore. Social media platform X, owned by Elon Musk, has been in the headlines a lot lately, and most of the news around the company has not been good. It also doesn't have a CEO right now, and it's been dealing with complaints of anti-Semitism and racism. Add on top of that, a hack of the account belonging to Sesame Street's Elmo. That was a bigger deal than you might think, and it makes you wonder if any accounts are safe. I'm Chris McCusker, and in this episode of The Big Story, I speak to Kurt Wagner, senior reporter for Bloomberg covering social media. He's also the author of Battle for the Bird, Jack Dorsey, Elon Musk, and the $44 billion fight for Twitter's soul, released in February of 2024. Walk us through that process. Why did you want to do this? Why did you want to write this book?
Well, I've been covering Twitter for over a decade, or about a decade, and I felt that this was actually in early 2023. I felt that there was a great story to be told about this company, sort of through the lens of the former CEO, Jack Dorsey. And so when I set out to write this book, believe it or not, it was originally going to be a bit of a Jack Dorsey biography. And I thought, I'll tell the story of this company, all these ups and downs I'd covered over a decade through the lens of this one very interesting and eccentric CEO. And as I was pitching the book and working on the book, Elon Musk showed up into the picture and originally was going to join the board, then quickly pivoted to buying the company. We all know the story now. He tried to get out of it over the summer of 2022. And I think for me, it was this really fortunate, quite frankly, situation where I wanted to write a Twitter book no matter what. And then the most interesting thing happened, which is that the richest man in the world showed up on the scene and created a ton of chaos. And so from a writer standpoint, it ended up being really fascinating to cover this story, but also really stressful because it was all unfolding sort of in real time. I think when I set out to do it, I thought I'd have more of a look back. But Elon, as he tends to do, sort of changed my game plan midstream.
And I mean, it's so interesting now in hindsight. You must look back, and it was a very different Twitter under Jack Dorsey.
It was incredibly different. Those two, Jack Dorsey and Elon Musk, share some, I think, visions for tech, visions of where things are headed, visions around, free speech and the role of social networks and free speech. But personality-wise, these two people couldn't be any more different. And I think the companies that they oversaw reflected in a lot of ways their personalities. And so with Jack Dorsey, we saw a very, I would say, kind of emotional version of Twitter, perhaps. I think the employees were very open with one another. There was a lot of at times like internal drama because people weren't afraid to speak their mind and say when they felt something wasn't going well or that they disagreed with a decision that the executive team made. It was just sort of a lot of like feelings, I think. And with Elon, it's not really about that at all. It's a pure engineering thing. Like the human element, I think, takes a backseat to the technical side of the company. And I think that's reflected again in the employees and in the culture that's built. So what we see today with X feels almost like even though it's the same product, it feels like a completely different company than the Twitter that I covered for a decade before Elon took over.
I mean, let's just remind people if we could, because, from where I'm sitting, the way it changed was there were a lot of news stories to come out of Twitter when it was still under Jack Dorsey's purview, less so on the offering your take on things. And then Elon Musk came in, and it seems now it's more about people's thoughts and takes on things rather than information. And Elon Musk let go the entire department, if I remember correctly, that did checks on misinformation and fake news, for lack of a better term. Do I remember that correctly?
I think that's right. I think if you were to really boil it down, I think Twitter, I'll call it Twitter 1.0. This is before Elon got there. I think the role of that company and product was, I mean, their motto was essentially what's happening, right? Like, we are going to be the number one place you go for news, the number one place you go to figure out what's going on in the world right now. And they did a ton of stuff, both with partnerships, with verification of journalists, um, to essentially make it the go-to destination for breaking news junkies. And I think Elon Musk has sort of said that that's something he wants, that he wants X to be a trusted source of news. But I think more than that, he wants X to be an entertainment platform. And what that means is that it's not so much focused, in my opinion, on the accuracy of news, on the urgency of news, but more on being entertained perhaps around the news cycle. We've even seen things like, even just, I think this week or last week, they rolled out a new quote unquote companion AI, which essentially feels like a female like anime character that you can talk with, and it's like a online girlfriend, like an AI girlfriend. Um, those are not, I think, the types of things that the original Twitter 1.0 team was focused on. Again, it was let's make this a utility for news, and I think Musk is saying let's make this an entertainment service. And you see that, we can get into that in deeper ways, but I think if you had to boil it down, that's the big difference. And as a result, I know that I certainly don't find X as valuable as I used to, because it doesn't provide that news value that I certainly crave as a journalist.
Okay, I'm glad I'm not the only one that sees it that way. The other thing that happened during the changeover was this sort of mass exodus of advertisers. And because it's now a private company, we don't really know if any or all came back.
Right. We know that the company has said most of the major advertisers have returned, but I think there's some caveats here. To take one step back, when Elon took over, the concern was that he was going to throw out the rule book for, speech guidelines, right? So hate speech or racism or sexual content. Like, he was sort of the mindset that unless it's illegal, it should be allowed. But the problem is that the Twitter that he bought, was a brand advertising business, which means that people spend money there because they want their brand associated with the feed, right? And when you have the speech rulebook essentially tossed out the window, now brands are going to say, well, wait a minute, is this really a company and a feed that we want to be associated with? And so a lot of them stop spending money. And I don't think X has done a ton to convince those people that it is now a brand safe place to spend money. Now, they will tell you, the company will tell you, that most of those advertisers have returned. But I think one thing you need to remember or realize is that there have also been several reports in the media that part of the reason these advertisers are coming back is that they're being threatened with lawsuits if they do not. And so there is currently a handful of advertisers that are being sued by X for not spending money on the service. And I think other advertisers have started to spend money there again for fear that they would be added to that list if they did not. And so, that's not really, I think, the sustainable or healthy way you want to grow your business. You could say people came back and are spending again, but if they're doing so sort of at gunpoint, what does that really mean? And I think that's the concern, is that this business has really run away a lot of its core advertisers, and those who've come back, maybe some are there legitimately, but some are certainly there because of fear. And I don't think that's, the long-term strategy that you want to be employing.
And I think the other part to this, or the other side to this maybe, is that the definition of free speech seems to be different than maybe what you and I thought it was. I feel like there are some things ending up on Twitter now that go well past the free speech line. There's been a degree of anti-Semitic remarks and things that were retweeted by Elon Musk himself. And that, I guess, would make advertisers uncomfortable as well. Fair?
Yes, I think the challenge historically, well before Elon, got to Twitter with all social networks, is that nobody knows where the free speech line should officially be placed. It is different for virtually every single person in the world. They all have a line that can be crossed that feels like it is, no longer a fair free speech statement. It's crossed over into hate speech or racism or whatever. And that's going to be different for different people. I think what we've seen with Elon is that his big criticism of Twitter before he took over was that the company did too much policing of speech. He felt that things were shackled down and that they needed to be sort of unleashed. And he has done a lot of that. He has let people say a lot more things on X today that would not have been allowed under Twitter 1.0. But what I think we've seen also is that he has his own lines of where people can cross a line. And sometimes it has nothing to do with hate speech or racism or anything like that. It has to do with criticizing him or criticizing one of his companies. Or I remember one of the details in my book was shortly after he took over, he was very upset that users were harassing Twitter advertisers on the platform. And he said, if you start harassing an advertiser, we're going to kick you off, right? And that's not like free speech. That's not, people have kind of spoken out against advertisers for decades. That's a form of protest. But to him, it crossed a line. And so when I hear, Elon is the quote unquote free speech absolutist, or when I see him talk about how he bought X and he's restored free speech, I'm very quick to point out he's restored his version of what free speech looks like, right? He has made X a reflection of where he wants to personally draw these lines. And a lot of people disagree with where he does that. And that's the problem, is that you're never going to please everybody, no matter who it is. But I think Elon in particular has taken things to a level that I shouldn't say most, but that a lot of people on the internet are very uncomfortable with. And that's why we've seen a lot of people leave X since he took over as well.
And that includes Linda Yaccarino, who was the CEO until recently.
That's right. Linda Yaccarino joined X in 2023. She's came from NBC Universal. She was an advertising executive, pretty well known in the industry. And she joined as CEO, and the delineation of responsibilities was essentially that Elon would continue to run the X product. He's the engineer. He would make those key product decisions, but that Linda Yaccarino would run the business. And she was an advertising person with advertising connections and relationships. And the feeling was that, if anyone could turn this thing around, it was going to be her. Now, 2 years later, I think, obviously she announced that she's leaving. I think the issue here is probably twofold. She was very loyal to Elon, but he's an incredibly hard person to work for, especially probably over these past 6 to 8 months while he's been very busy and distracted with his world of politics. But X has also pivoted dramatically in the last 6 months. It was recently merged with Elon Musk's AI company, XAI. It feels as though the advertising part of X is falling by the wayside. We talked already about the struggles they've had with advertisers. It just feels like they're almost ready to throw in the towel on that. And so if you're not really focused on advertising anymore, and instead you're focused on, using X as a sort of data source to train and develop AI models, I'm not sure if Linda Yaccarino is the best person to be running that type of company. And so she's stepping down. We're still waiting to see who the next CEO will be, if they even pick one. I'm sure they'll pick somebody. But my guess is this new somebody will not be an advertising or traditional business person, but will instead be someone more in tune with the world of AI, more in tune with trying to turn this kind of social network into a force for Grock and other AI products moving forward.
Okay, I was going to get to Grock. For people who don't know, can you explain what that is?
Yeah, Grock is a chatbot, similar to ChatGPT or Meta AI. It's uh, powered by Elon Musk's AI company, or it's built by Elon Musk's AI company, XAI, and it's been folded into X. And so you can ask it questions. You can tag it on a tweet and say, "Hey, Grok, what do you think of this, or is this true?" And it will reply automatically. The issue over the last couple weeks has been that Grok took a very dramatic turn in terms of the types of content it started returning to people when they were asking it questions. Specifically, it started spewing anti-Semitic uh, content, and it praised Hitler, and it would make other anti-Semitic comments against Jewish people, and it very quickly became this. Embarrassing black eye for the company. Even XAI acknowledged these things have gone too far. We need to adjust this. And it raises all kinds of questions of like, who taught this chatbot to do that, right? Like these are computers, these are AI systems. Something or someone teaches them how to answer these questions, and where did that come from? Now, Grok is trained on data from X. So there's a lot of talk like, well, if you put the content of X into a bot, what are you going to get out? You're going to get out the anti-Semitism and racism and things that have been proliferated on this platform. And so I think it feels sort of like a full circle moment here where the stuff you're seeing on X is now showing up via the X chatbot as well, and they have to figure out how to, fix that. Quite frankly, it's obviously a major problem.
And then you have the hack of Elmo, of all accounts on Twitter, all accounts on X to hack and again spew anti-Semitic things. I mean, we've sort of joked in our newsroom here that if Elmo's account isn't safe, are any of our accounts safe?
Right. There have been hacks over the years of a bunch of high-profile first Twitter users. Again, this was long before Elon showed up on the scene. There have been hacks of Twitter users. I think this Elmo one it's interesting for two reasons. The first is it just looks really terrible to have such a beloved childhood cartoon character saying and posting the types of things that Elmo was posting, right? Again, anti-Semitic stuff, racist stuff. And I think it's just embarrassing for the company. It's a bad look for, if you're a brand, if you're, Sesame Street, the last thing you want to do is use X anymore, right? Because now you've had sort of this embarrassing moment with one of your key brands. And this is why those brands are worried about going to X, is they don't want to be associated with this stuff. And so it sort of reinforces that. The second interesting thing, and this could be a total coincidence, but I have a tough time imagining it's a total coincidence, is that when Elon Musk showed up and took over the company, the nickname that the former Twitter employees gave him was Elmo. So when they would talk about him in group chats, or if they would talk about him in Slack or whatever, they would often refer to him as Elmo instead of calling him by, his real name. And it does make me wonder if, poor Elmo, the little red Muppet, sort of got caught in the crossfire here, because whoever did this hack, perhaps they knew that. Again, maybe not, but perhaps they're sort of in on the joke. And maybe hacking Elmo was meant to be a bit of a signal, to the former Twitter people who used to refer to Elon in that way.
So what's the future of this platform?
As we see these issues with racism, and as we see, Elon Musk's attention and time get pulled in a lot of different directions, like what is this thing in 5 years? And I really don't know the answer. I tend to believe that X will still be around, because this seems like a company that just simply can't die. It's gone through so many crazy ups and downs, and yet here it is continuing to operate in 2025. But I do feel that it might be a different type of company 5 years from now. I don't think it'll be we won't think of it as an advertising business. I think it'll very much play into the world of AI and Grock and AI chatbots. It's possible there's a whole payments business sort of on top of this at some point. It's something Elon Musk has talked a lot about. They haven't yet been able to kind of crack that egg, but something that he wants to build. So it's a company that I've followed a long time and will continue to follow simply because it feels like there's always a next chapter for this thing. I don't feel like it'll feel the same as it does today in a couple of years.
Well, and I wonder with the, sort of rolling it into the XAI, what that really means. Is it likely to become sort of an extension of some sort of artificial intelligence something?
I think it has two purposes. The first being the data and the training. So they need people posting on X and posting specifically about real-time things going on so that they can continue to use those posts to feed into this chatbot, right? So that when the chatbot responds to a question, it knows what's going on in the world. And there is a belief that having this unique data set of tweets gives Grock an advantage in that regard, because no other chatbots, as far as I know, are able to train off of posts from X. So if X can maintain sort of a relevance in culture and politics and sports, then the chatbot will be in some ways more educated or smarter because of that. And so I think that's one. And the other is that X is a distribution tool for the AI products. So not only are the tweets powering the chatbot or teaching the chatbot, but they can put the chatbot into X and reach all of the consumers who use the platform, right? You sort of need a surface for which people to find these AI bots, whether it's an app or ideally, something they're already using like X. And so it does feel like a bit of a give and take here. The data is used to train the chatbot. Meanwhile, the chatbot gets distributed on X. I think that's sort of the most valuable thing that X is providing these days versus, a major business around advertising. And so when I say I think it's going to head in the AI direction, that's sort of what I mean. I think the value of the company is tied to these AI products much more than anything else. And so that's where I feel like it's going to continue to move down that path.
You might have to write another book.
Oh, I don't know. People keep asking me if I'm going to do a sequel. I don't know if I have it in me to do another book about Elon Musk. He's such a newsmaker, and he's all over the map in terms of his interests and focus. It's he's a great person to follow as a journalist because he's so busy and active, and he's also an incredibly hard person to write about. So I might let someone else write the follow and just enjoy it from my couch. We'll see.
Fair enough. Thank you again so much for doing this. I appreciate your expertise and your insight on all of it. It's very interesting.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's Kurt Wagner, the author of Battle for the Bird, Jack Dorsey, Elon Musk, and the $44 billion fight for Twitter's soul, released in 2024. He's also a senior reporter for Bloomberg, covering social media. That wraps up this episode of The Big Story. You can send us feedback on this episode or any other by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca. I'm Chris McCusker. Thanks for listening.